it literally felt like my brain was constantly like battling reality every single second of every single moment of my life. And it really wasn't until, I started to change my behavior. I started to learn some like foundations where I really started to understand that social anxiety is it's like a mental health condition, and it's one of the most common ones in America. And it's also one of them that, like, in doing the research for my book, social anxiety is actually the most correlated with substance abuse and social isolation out of a lot of the other mental health conditions. And both of those like triple your rate for suicide. Yo, what's poppin', man?
Mark, how you doing, man?
Dude, I'm been so excited, eagerly waiting this. Are you standing?
Yes, I just got a stand-up desk actually a couple days
Nice.
ago. So
Nice.
I heard a friend tell me this sitting is the new smoking. He's very, very involved with brain health, overall health, and performance. And when he said that, I was like, oh, shit, I gotta get a stand-up desk because I sit quite a bit now, especially working from home.
Yeah, for sure, dude. I mean, dude, primary function of the brain is to take care of your body, which is movement. So it's gotta cross off that initial checkpoint. So I totally agree. I would normally be standing, but I mean, I have like a kitchen counter I could stand on top of there, but the background is kind of like fucked up. Like this, it doesn't look that nice. So I'd rather just do this. But dude, how have things been for you, man? I miss
Man,
you.
yeah, man, I miss you too, man. Like that's why I know we've been talking about making this happen for a minute. You've had me on your show a couple times, and so I'm really thankful to be at this point where, it was is bulk of what we're going to talk about today. It was just moving through those limiting beliefs and fears of like, oh, I'm not good enough to interview people, especially someone like my good friend Mark Metry, who is a boss in this area and that area, and I know you speak to that, and it's why I love you and I appreciate you. You're very transparent, and so yeah, man, things have been good. I'm just inside and out, just progressing, learning more about myself, peeling back the layers, discovering who Josh Perry really is and who I thought he was, which wasn't true. It was just an extension of me. And, a lot of the same things we always talk about, just getting to the truth and the core of who we are, what we want to be true about our lives, and doing the work to make it happen and not looking at it as work, really just looking at change and evolution. So to say that, at least things have been great, improving inside and out, and just gaining more confidence in speaking my truth and living it.
Dude, I love that, man. I definitely think same for me, but I also think this is probably like the most confusing time in my career, in my life, aside from maybe like my initial starting point. Just because like I share a lot of similarities of like, I'm in like this whole world of podcaster, speaker, author, and I think obviously there's a lot of great people in there. But I also just like, am sort of looking at people's careers and kind of asking myself, like, do I want to, end up there? Am I actually doing something beneficial? And am I doing it based on my current truth or based on like the mission that I started like 5 years ago, and my identity? So it's been confusing for sure to say the least. But yeah, man, I think every day it's just been about like exploring and not seeing myself as like a final product, but seeing myself as like a constant evolution, which can be hard. It is very hard for sure. So um, I try to my best to do that. And also, I want to thank you because I remember, I don't know when I think it was when you came on my podcast, or it could have been just when we were talking before. But I remember you said something like, I went bowling at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon or 3 o'clock. We were talking about like work-life balance. And I actually quoted you in a clubhouse because I was talking to people about that. It was about mental health and entrepreneurship, and just like showing people that, so much of our lifestyles have now changed, obviously because of COVID, but then of course because of this new economy we're living in. Everyone's working online, and like you're a good example of that. And so yeah, man, thank you again for having me here.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's an honor to have you here, and it's so I don't know how to put words to like you taking something from my brain that I shared with you and sharing with other people, which is the mission I'd say at the end of the day for both of us is reaching more people. So I'm grateful that that resonated with you and you shared that, and that was I talk with my good friend Mitch. He is going through, I'd say a struggle, not really a struggle, but like a challenge of how do I feel good about doing things that are pleasurable, leisure, things like that during the week, and like working on the week. And I was like, dude, like what I told you, Mark, like, man, I schedule bowling in the middle of the day. Like I work for myself. Like at the end of the day, my main intention of my life, beyond serving other people and supporting them with things that I've learned and have gained value from, is to live my ideal life. And that doesn't mean working 9 to 5 at my own home, working my own business. Like it means doing what I want when I want to a degree. And that's aligned with a vision for myself. So it makes sense that I do a little bit of work on the weekends. I would, do whatever I want during the day. Like that's the beauty of working for yourself. But it's challenging you to that point. You got to work a lot. You got to work hard and things that you learn along the way. But like that balance, it becomes easy when you're congruent with your behavior to the words in your vision. And by the time people listen to this episode, this will be coming out probably a week or two after my good friend Sean Wells, who I think I've mentioned to you before. He's an amazing human that I think you would gain a lot of value just even having a conversation, let alone being on your show. But he said the same thing. For so long, his head was down. He was grinding. He was hustling. And then he made the money, had patents and all these supplements like on this and that, all these shows, hanging out with all the people you can mention. And then he was like, I'm sick. Hashimoto's, pituitary tumor, all these things, depression, suicidal tendencies. Like his book's coming out soon too, and there's just so much synergy. So I want to make that connection if I haven't already. But he talks about it. He's like, man, like what was the purpose of all that? I was getting sick and like I had all these things, but I wasn't feeling congruent. I wasn't feeling whole. And when I decided to lift my head up, I was like, oh, let's strip all of this who defined me, because I defined me. And now he's got a whole different approach in life. And none of that stuff went away. And so it's just, I think that perspective, that context of work and health and life and what you want to be true about your life is really important. And not many of us do that. Not many of us consciously think about, what am I doing? How am I designing my days? Is this what I want to do? We listen to the noise and then we go and do that. And, for you and myself, we've taken a different approach. And I think that's very inspiring because we've learned a lot along the way. We've had a lot of rough patches, but we reframe them. What did I learn? Let's be curious about it. What can I do moving forward? And so that's why I wanted to have you on here, just to have a conversation, but also just share the value that is your life and your lens of your life, because you have a very interesting story. It's very different than mine. It's very different from a lot of people, but at the basic human level, we have the same basic human needs. A lot of yours were challenged, and you learned from it so much so that you wrote a book about it. And you speak about it and you coach about it and you do all these things. So I'm really excited. And that's the first thing I wanted to get into, because your book, came out mid last year or so. Yeah, Screw Being Shy.
It came out the day the entire world shut down, March 14th.
So pretty good timing for people to have some luxury time to read. But yeah, let's talk about that, because social anxiety is a big platform you speak on and you've worked through, which is, I think, the most compelling person to listen to on a topic is someone that has experienced it. And, we can talk about coach versus mentor, how a mentor can coach, but also mentors walk the path, gone through it. So, let's just start there, man. Like, let me get you to explain your perspective on what social anxiety is and how it's shown up in your life, but more importantly, what you've done with the learnings.
Yeah, for sure, man. So, kind of quick, like 5-minute origin story. So for me, my parents, they came from Egypt a year before I was born to America on the East Coast, to Massachusetts, to Boston. And my parents, they came to this country with $200 in their pocket. My dad would work like all the time, really living like the immigrant lifestyle. I remember growing up in like the projects in like the inner city. Seeing like some crazy things, but nothing too crazy. And really for me, like a time that I look back on that really influenced me was when my parents and we moved out of the inner city and we moved into a small town in Massachusetts. And this small town had like 5,000 people in it. And the really interesting part about this town was that, just like most rural communities in America, most small towns in America, there's no racial diversity whatsoever. And so I remember just kind of going to this new environment where I was the only person who looked different from everybody else. And I remember there was maybe my family and maybe like one or two other families in that entire town who were just different. And at this time, this was like post 9/11 in America. And so if you were Middle Eastern, Arab, any sort of similar category in there, you definitely, felt a lot of hatred and racism, because of what had happened. And so I remember just being like this young kid in like this new school, and then all of a sudden facing like so much racism that I had never experienced before, and really almost just like my kind of like my life changing overnight without really me knowing it, without me really having that conscious awareness. And it's almost as if like my mind just like retracted, and it was just like, hey, let's just like put our head down, let's not talk to anybody. And it was really as if like almost overnight my brain was almost just put in almost like a mental prison for basically like the next 10 years of my life. And, throughout that period, I was just always the person who didn't have any friends, who would never speak up, who would always just kind of want to be invisible. And it's interesting because throughout that period, like when I was, a teenager, I really used the internet as a way to kind of deal with my pain and my emotions. And I remember at this time, the internet wasn't really obviously what it is today. And that was like my first glimpse into entrepreneurship. And I kind of went from, some kid who my family was like literally on food stamps, living nowhere, to starting a business online as a kid, as a teenager, making six figures. Uh, it being a pretty fun business, like me actually enjoying what I was doing, gaining a lot of profit, branching out in my community. And um and so basically, that's my life. And by the time I'm like 18 years old, I start to gain some sense of awareness around the fact that I actually do have social anxiety. Previously, up to that moment, for me, I had no idea that social anxiety was a real thing. I just thought that I was either like some quiet introvert, or like I was just like some moral or ethical failure who just couldn't talk to people. And my life was just always destined to be this way. And so I remember when I realized that, at first it made things kind of go worse, because when I first realized I had a problem, I actually tried to solve it. I tried to expose myself, to talk to people. And if anything, my social anxiety actually got worse. And it led me to this point in my life where I was in college, I was 18. And next thing I know, I am basically dealing with my emotions and my pain with mostly food, some alcohol and drugs, but mostly just food. Next thing I know, I'm like over 200 pounds. I'm obese. I get seriously depressed for the first time in my life. And my lifelong social anxiety that I always had all of a sudden transforms into like social isolation. And I just like stop talking to people. And next thing I know, like at the end of 2015, beginning of 2016, I become suicidal for a period of about a month. And I really sort of see the worst side of me in a way that I didn't even know existed. And, long story short, I didn't, it's not like I made some crazy transformation overnight. But what I would do is, I was living in Boston, is I would go for walks in the middle of the night in the most dangerous areas on purpose. And I would just like fantasize about somebody coming up and trying to mug me and kill me, just because like obviously I wasn't a bad person, but it was just because I was in so much pain. I didn't know what to do. I didn't see any other answers. And so I remember doing that. And really, while I was doing that, me, a variety of factors happening, where basically I just realized that I was going to become a statistic. And like all these dreams that I always had as a kid, and like all these glimpses of my potential, of who I could be, I just realized that all that could just die with me. And it was also the time where I stopped looking at my past as a sort of like an indicator of who I should be to who I want to be. I always, whenever I wanted to do something different, I wanted to change my behavior, I wanted to do something new, my brain would always tell me, like, Mark, you can't do that because everybody knows you as the shy guy, or you can't do that because this happened in your past and this and that. But when I hit that rock bottom, I was literally like, I'm going to die and my life is going to end. And so I just need to get proactive about this. And I just started to look at my past as motivation and be like, you know what? Let me try to see if I can become somebody who literally nobody can even imagine, myself included. And so ever since that moment, like when I was 18 in like 2015, I've been on like this crazy journey of just like transforming myself, you know, my physical health, my mental health, um, my spirituality, you know, started a couple businesses, started a podcast, wrote a book, got invited to do a TEDx talk, all kinds of things that I've had the, you know, privilege of being a part of. And yeah, man. And, you know, to answer your question on what is social anxiety, you know, I think the definition that best works with social anxiety, I think this comes from a friend of mine, Ellen Hendrickson. She's a clinical psychologist at Boston University, and she defines social anxiety as a perception that there is something somehow wrong with you or deficient about you, and if you don't try like really hard to make up for that, then people are going to judge you, mock you, exile you. And so, you know, this is kind of like a hard thing to describe to somebody, for someone who's never experienced this, because there's so much like misinformation out there in the world in general, but specifically about social anxiety and introversion and shyness. And it's like, it's totally normal to be shy every once in a while. Like that's a totally normal, you know, human reaction, right? But there are people out there who they have such extreme shyness in every single situation that it actually takes their free will to respond, and it hijacks their brain. And like in the book Screw Being Shy, I talk about all the time, it's like it literally felt like my brain was constantly like battling reality every single second of every single moment of my life. And it really wasn't until, you know, I started to change my behavior, I started to learn some like foundations, where I really started to understand that social anxiety is like it's like a mental health condition, and it's one of the most common ones in America. And it's also one of them that, like in doing the research for my book, social anxiety is actually the most correlated with substance abuse and social isolation out of a lot of the other mental health conditions. And both of those like triple your rate for suicide. And when I was kind of looking at like the mental health, you know, world, and sort of like people in the mainstream, how they view mental health, and it's usually like, hey, if you have mental health problems, you know, you go to a doctor, you visit a therapist, or you call the suicide hotline, and all those are fine. But for me, you know, looking back to my situation when I was 18, where I was suicidal, I realized that I didn't just randomly become suicidal. I became suicidal because I had decades, or a decade of social anxiety, of undealt mental health problems. And when it comes to like speaking up about mental health in general, it's hard enough for the average person to come and speak up and you know, be open with their mental health problems. But it's like 100,000 times harder for somebody to do that who has social anxiety. And so I was just like, dude, I got to write this book, because there's so much like misunderstanding that really hurts people. And I really do think that social anxiety within mental health, I really do think it's like the next invisible epidemic that's already happening, that really affects people in every part of their lives. And yet, you know, today, a lot of people who have like serious social anxiety are just sort of like dismissed harmlessly as being an introvert, or being quiet, or like lacking public speaking skills. And there's just two different kinds of people, you know. And so I just wanted to write this book to just, you know, spread my awareness and spread like my solutions, my tools, my story. And then I also did like, I tried my best to do research to, you know, feature studies in my book that show, you know, evidence of, you know, different ways and potential remedies that people have been using to treat social anxiety. And so, yeah, man, it's a big problem, and it's an invisible problem that most people have no idea. And I think, unfortunately, this is one of those things where this is going to become a lot more popular, or more aware, like 5-10 years from now, due to the negative repercussions that we're going to see in our society, and especially with quarantine, lockdown. I think it's made things, worse for people who have social anxiety. And so, yeah, man, it's quite an interesting topic, and thank you for opening this with me.
Yeah, yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing all that. And you touched on so many important factors, which we're going to get into. But I think that's why we connected and we're aligned and we're friends and we're having this conversation, is because we got to a place where we hit rock bottom, so to speak, and everything changed because of that moment. And it's just like, to create a diamond, you have to have pressure and you have to have heat, and it transforms something from ugly to beautiful, right? And we went through these hard lessons. But what I think is so profound about your story and our efforts, which I see as similar in very different ways, various different ways, but very aligned, is the fact that we went through something. We chose to pick ourselves up. We chose to learn. We chose to strive forward to the vision in our mind. And now we want to help people avoid having to hit rock bottom, because we know it's possible. Because if we were able to hit rock bottom and get out of rock bottom, we know it's a choice to prevent that if you have the skills and the knowledge there. And that's what, just going through your book, it's easy to see. You said you mentioned study, like, yeah, it's full of citations of, actual science, if you will, to back up these concepts and these theories and your experience, which experience is the biggest proof of anything. It's like, did you do something? You can speak to it.
Yeah.
The N=1 experimentation things. So, like I said, you mentioned so many important things, and also I'd say, the substance, whether it's food, it's drugs, it's alcohol, it's sex, it's shopping, it's gambling, it's whatever. It's a belief of mine that it has a pure intention of the person going through the pain. The intention is positive because they're trying to release the pain. They're trying to avoid it. They're trying to get away from pain and feel normal, if you will, or feel pleasure, or just feel baseline. So the intention's always pure. It's just we don't know in the moment that what we're trying to do may be harming us even further or more enabling the problem. But in the moment, we can't think greater than our problems. And that's what I see your book and this conversation and all the things that you do are tools, they're solutions, they're skills, they're knowledge. It's, hey, I feel you. I've been there. Here's what helped me. Give it a shot. I'm not going to promise it's going to work, but I promise it'll have a higher probability of changing your life than not. So that's one of the biggest things that comes to mind of all the things you said. And I'm curious, I mean, I don't know if you saw, you just had so many things. I was writing so many different notes and ideas. Like, what I want to start with is, through all of that, growing up, developing this social anxiety, unaware of it to a point that you did become aware of it. What do you think, and have you thought of this, but what do you think that did for your identity, or like who you believed you were in that moment, that influenced the way you lived your life and the lens that you saw the world? Because we know interpretation, or our perception, is how we interpret things. And we know from that what you focus on expands. And when you believe something, that's your focus, you're going to see more of it. That's the unconscious mind at work. So I'm curious for you is, going through these experiences and growing up, how did this identity evolve to where you got so aware of it that you decided to make a change, but it came from hitting rock bottom? So let's talk more about that identity piece.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I think identity is so important to talk about. But, I remember, reading a study too that, literally said that if you are in an environment where your peers, people around you, value you less, your brain will pick up on that, and it will create the necessary neurotransmitters to populate your brain and create a reality where you are less than everybody. And there's different ways I can break that down, but really for me, the biggest sort of difference that happened was, I remember it was like my first college party that I went to, and it was the first time I actually got drunk for the first time in my life. And I remember, getting drunk and all of a sudden experiencing in first person the contrast of being, a socially anxious, shy introvert, to alcohol, shuts down the part of your brain that, perceives social judgment. And so, alcohol, it's also probably why it's one of the world's most popular substances to drink. I remember experiencing that and just being like, wow, I could talk to anybody. And I remember, like, that night or the day after, just being like, wait, what the hell was that? Like, how was I able to all of a sudden, like, ingest a chemical substance that made me react in a certain way that changed how my mind perceived the world and then changed my behavior. And I remember ever since then, I remember Googling things and basically coming across the discovery that like social anxiety is a real thing. And I know a lot of people, for example, like in this community, they say, oh, don't call yourself depressed or anxious, or don't diagnose yourself. And I agree with that to a point. But I also think that if your nervous system has been acting in a certain way throughout your entire life, and you just think that's you, then that's like the ground for creating, more mental health problems and having low self-esteem and thinking that that is your identity. And it's almost as if social anxiety is like this defense mechanism slash like bug or a glitch or like a virus. I would say virus that comes in and it hijacks your operating system. And next thing you know, a year passes by, 2 years pass by, now 10 years pass by, and you start to think that that is literally who you are. That is a personality trait. And I think oftentimes that's what happens to most people when they think about being shy. They think it's like a personality trait. And I definitely think it is for some people. I don't think there's anything wrong with being like a quiet introvert who likes his solitude. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But when you are socially anxious and when there's not enough education and awareness about mental health, then you literally begin to think that's who you are. And like I literally thought that I was just going to work at McDonald's for the rest of my life. I thought that I would be one of those people who would just like be like that random guy in like a cubicle in like the corner who would just like do what he was told, put his head down, and then just go home, and then just like not have a significant other, and then just like knock out in front of the TV while drinking a beer. And I thought that's like all what my life was going to be. And it really wasn't until I made this distinction to be like, oh wait, I'm not just like randomly hallucinating, or I'm not making this stuff up. Uh, but mental health is real, and there is a real thing called social anxiety. It's not just in your like it, yeah, it's not just in your thoughts. And so I think having that distinction completely changed my perspective, because it was only until then where I could get neutral and objective about my situation. And it wasn't no longer until like, if I was in a situation where I had to speak up or something, and I messed up, what I was going to say, or people who have social anxiety, they like rehearse what they're going to say to people like 20 times in their head before it happens. And a lot of the times where I would mess up, it switched from, oh, Mark, you suck, like you're a loser, you're so stupid, to, oh, wait, no, I just have social anxiety and this is like a mental health problem. And what happened was my view went from, hey, I'm a moral, ethical failure that's just stuck this way, to all of a sudden it almost became more of like a science project where I was like, let me experiment with this thing. Oh, let me experiment with that thing. Let me try to change this. Let me change the input of this. And I think that was like the biggest like miracle looking back at this, because I have spoken to a lot of people who, have had similar paths, similar journeys to me. And that's a real problem they get into, of like self-development, of like people can't work on themselves because every time they try to, this like bubble of shame about who their character is comes back into play. And so for me, I'm so grateful that I actually like found out that this is not, at least in my situation, this is not like a personality trait. This is not like a moral or an ethical failure. This is just like sort of like the way that my life sort of happened to be, based on a wide variety of factors, from genetics to my early life experience to trauma to my health to my brain health, that created this sort of environment. And it's up to me to sort of take the steps every single day to heal, transform, so I can actually just be who I want to be as a person. And it's so crazy because, I think we all face this, growing up, but I think people who have social anxiety especially have this issue of like, they feel like they can never be themselves, and they feel like they can only show certain parts of their identity to certain people. And that's like one of the biggest like mental prisons that I'm so grateful to be out of. You know, I still have problems. I still have issues with my mental health, but that's something that I definitely don't miss. And it's like truly so painful. And there's literally millions of people out there who are like stuck in like this world inside of their heads of like rethinking about what they're going to say 100 times and not being able to fall asleep at night because they're like replaying all the social scenarios, or they're addicted to some kind of substance. Usually it's like alcohol. That's the biggest one for people who have social anxiety, or, you know, social isolation, which is an interesting topic because now COVID quarantine, like I know I have some friends of mine who have social anxiety, and for them it's sort of been like a really terrible thing because now like they can just be by themselves all the time, and it's like more acceptable obviously because we're in quarantine and lockdown, when in reality like that's social isolation is like a terrible, terrible, terrible. And so yeah, man, it's really interesting, but I think that was like the biggest thing kind of looking back to this. It's like differentiating my identity with the sort of matter at hand and taking a more neutral, objective standpoint that enabled me to sort of not look at myself as like a broken thing that's destined to be a failure, to like a science project, to like let me experiment with that. And I think that's really how I was able to like work on myself and develop consistently through like the various habits and stuff that you talk about all the time.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'm glad that you mentioned that because that's, I believe, the first step to change is to be curious. You know, look at something, whether it's yourself, it's a result, it's an experience, it's another person, it's whatever. Just go, huh, that's interesting. What can I do about this? What can I learn from this? Why did this happen? How did this come about? Because then you open up your mind to think differently than yourself. You think larger than who you think you are in the moment, and or your feelings, which how many of us identify as our feelings? I'm tired. I'm sick. I'm scared. I'm
Yeah.
anxious. I'm depressed. Like, that's not who you are. That's an emotion that you feel. But because we get locked into that, because that's the language of the body, that's what we feel, that signals our brain to say, I'm this. When in reality, that's just how you feel, which is fine. There's no right or wrong to it. You're not broken. That's what I went through. I felt like I was broken. I get diagnosed with a brain tumor. I was 21. I'm like a professional athlete. And I'm like, oh, I'm embarrassed to share this because like I'm supposed to be this elite athlete and I'm so successful. And then like I got a brain tumor. Like I was guilty. I felt guilty about it. I felt shameful. But that's not me. That's just an experience. And it led me to where I am today, similar to you. And I love that you touched upon identity and personality, because another way of looking at personality, like you mentioned, it's just developed over time through biological connections and reactions and experiences, our environment. And when we know our prefrontal cortex doesn't fully develop toward 26, so we don't have that part of our brain to look at a situation with logic and make reason that's rational out of it. We just see things. And an example of this is, you're younger, you hear people yelling, you don't know the difference of like distinguishing, are they angry or are they excited? Same intensity, same shouting, but one person could be mad and one person could be excited. And that's something Jackie and I have, had communication challenges with, that we've been working through now with our years together. Her family, very positive but loud, a big Italian family, always yelling. Where I come from, with my past, as we probably talked about with my past, a stepfather who was abusive, loud voices meant anger and meant pain. So it was just a different internal representation of the same experience. And tying this back to identity and personality, these things develop over time. It's not fixed. But when we can recognize, hey, I don't enjoy this, then we can flip it. Like, what do you want to be true? And then just be curious. Like, what would life be like? And then you start changing the what's the quote? Neurons that fire together wire together. You start unfiring and wiring, and then firing and wiring new connections. And that's the step to change. And actually, I love Dr. Joe Dispenza's work because he shows like change in action in the brain. He shows synapses and these wires of neurons unwiring. And sorry, my cat is going crazy trying to get in here. But that's something that was so transformative to me, is learning like, hey, like I'm not, because I used to think I was shy. And I'd have cameras at contests put in front of my face, and like looking back at videos now when I was 17, I was just like, I felt so sorry for myself because I knew I could see the pain, I could see the uncomfortableness. I didn't know what anxiety was until a couple years ago, like as it pertains to my reality, until Jackie was
Right.
like, that's anxiety. I was like, no, I feel a little nauseous and like really hot. And like, it really, we learned about this in turbulence on a flight. And she was like, that's anxiety. I was like, no, I kept rationalizing how I was feeling on a biochemical, physiological way. She's like, that's anxiety. And I was like, oh. So, you know, what I'm getting at is we can change these states that we're in. They're not fixed. And there's a lot of amazing people. We know Dr. Daniel Amen, Spec Imaging, showing this, Dr. Joe Dispenza, and so on and so forth. Your friend that you mentioned earlier, like you can change your personality over time, but it starts with being aware of it and then understanding what do you want to be true. And it takes a lot of time and effort. Yeah, no doubt. Especially if you're 30 years old or you're 50 years old and you realize like, oh, I feel so insecure and I don't want that. What do I got to do? All that firing, wiring for 50 years is just so tightly wrapped that it's going to take some time. And that's the beauty of it, though. Like you mentioned earlier, you know, we're not finished products. We're always evolving as we grow, as we age. Like, you know, it's never a destination. And I know that that phrase is like really corny now. Like it's not a destination. It's a journey. Like love the journey. Like, but it's so true. Like your environment's always changing inside and out. And so, what I'm curious
Yeah.
about is you mentioned recognizing, oh, this is just because I have social anxiety and then working through it. Like, did it ever become like a crutch to hide behind in fear of like, I'm not going to do that because I have social anxiety. That's my identity. I have social anxiety, so it's okay. I'm not going to do that. Like, did you ever experience any of that? Like, I guess
Mm.
like, yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It definitely makes sense. I don't necessarily think that I have experienced that per se, but maybe that's because, I've always just been like a loving I've always just been a loving sort of like person to myself. Like I was, thank God I like I never really thought about hurting myself except for, that time that I said I was suicidal. And so I mean, I don't know, I probably was just too easy on myself, too soft on myself or something like that. But I don't think I ever experienced that. But I would definitely say though that, one of the biggest things that I have learned about this is that, there's so many masks that we can put on, right? And each one of those masks, like let's say for example, like when I was talking to people like about this book and stuff, they would tell me something like, oh, I'm not really a shy person, but uh, you know, I grew up being like the class clown. And I know that if I'm not funny or if I'm not in some comedic sort of environment, then I am a little bit shy. Or someone else who says, or it's like that guy at like the networking event or something who can't stop talking about himself and how successful he is. And it's like that's a mask of like success. And I often find this is like a subsection of my book where like so many of us have, like, whether it's a deep underlying insecurity or we don't really know who we are, we're not sure about that. um and a lot of the times we just sort of lean on things that give us some sort of external validation to create this perception of confidence, when in reality that's not really confidence, right? And so I think that's been one of the biggest things that I've been focusing on is like, am I creating like this false mask for myself? And there was a time where I really started to see this, as like a speaker, for example. Like I love speaking, even though I have a past of social anxiety, I still absolutely love, going out there and speaking. But, I remember, this was in January of 2020. This is like the last speaking gig that I did before the world shut down. And I remember the day before I gave a talk, for some reason, I just felt like really depressed. And I didn't necessarily know why. And I kind of like took that day off. It was like a Friday. And I took that day off and I just like went to a park and I just like hiked for hours in the snow. And I remember I had like a lot of fun. And it was like a really like, introspective kind of day for me, of kind of, just going through my life and just figuring out, what to do. And I remember the next day at the speaking engagement, after I kind of gave my keynote, and there was a question and answer section, and someone kind of like, asked a question. They're like, you know, they kind of implied that, like, there was me and three other speakers. They kind of implied that since we were speakers, we probably don't get anxiety, or we probably don't get nervous, or we don't have bad days. And I kind of really just use that as a moment to be like, I could pretend to like lie and look cool on stage, or I could just be honest. And I was just like, you know what, honestly, guys, yesterday I had a terrible day. I was like, yo, how am I going to do this speaking gig? And I remember someone after that came up to me, who was also a speaker, who was a much more successful speaker than me, like way more seasoned in their career. And he came up to me, and he kind of acknowledged me, and he said, like, dude, that happens to me, like, all the time. And I know speakers who really fall down like this false mask of confidence, and it's almost like a deviation from their identity. And it's like, instead of who you want to be as a person with your identity, it's almost like, I'm going to be this person because I can get sort of external validation, and it's easier for me to do it. And for me, what I've realized is, you could play that card once, you could play that card 2 times, you could play that card 3 times, but eventually you're going to get to a spot in your life where, if you're not living in like your identity, you're eventually going to enter in a spot where you feel so numb to life, because it's not going to be your life. And that, for me, is probably one of the greatest gifts and one of the greatest superpowers that I feel like I have now, because I, faced social anxiety for a decade, which is basically like your brain asking you, like, every single day and every single moment, like, who are you going to choose to be? Who are you going to choose to be? Who are you going to choose to be? And literally, Josh, every single time when I was a kid, I always chose the fake version of myself, always. And now that's almost like a scar, to where, like, I can't do that anymore. Like my soul just won't let me. Like, I cannot try to be some fake, version, some mask, some fake identity, even if I think it'll make me more successful or more popular. I just can't do that, because I know the cost of that. And I'm not willing to pay that cost again. And so, I have no idea what your original question is, but I hope you enjoyed my answer.
It was perfect. I love it. And it just reminds me of so many things, like these masks, it reminds me of like the gap of who we are inside and what we're projecting onto others, so we can hopefully get them to perceive us as what we're projecting. And I've been trying to understand this more and more lately, like getting into like the shadow work and like the ego and like how projections work. And an example of this, from my understanding of like the shadow, is like, let's say we see someone that's like, we would think they're cocky and loud and obnoxious. What we're really doing is telling ourselves that we want confidence. We're shy. We're dealing with social anxiety, but we see this person as the opposite of how we feel. And even though we want to be more like them, we think they're negative. And then that's like really us projecting our shadow onto them and seeing a mirror reflection of like who we want to be, and that creates this gap. And you talk about masks, and it's such a good analogy, because we're putting on a facade, and social media comes in here, and it can either be a huge tool or a huge detriment to your efforts, depending on how you view things and what your perception is of it. But so many people put on these masks that they're projecting to the world of how successful they are, how happy they are, and how like this and that. But more times than not, they're dealing with this gap of identity of who they feel they are beneath. And you talking about being on stage and someone saying like, oh, it's gonna be so easy. Like, I've had that happen to me so many times. And one of the last times I was on stage, I think I told you about this, it was October 2019. I shared the stage with David Goggins. I dealt with so much imposter syndrome, so much fear and anxiety. Like, I was like, I don't even, like, I forget what I was going to talk about. I had my slides, but I was like, all this stuff. And I got into my zone, and I focused on the purpose of what I was doing and why I was giving the talk. And it went great. Like, it always does when you're focused and you get past all the noise. But when I was done, we did like 10, 20 minutes of questions. Someone asked me like, you look like, how do you get up there and do this? You look so confident. It's got to be so easy. Like this. And I was like, honestly, I am so nervous every time I get on stage. 10 plus years competing professionally in BMX, nervous until my name gets called and it's my time, 60 seconds, and everything blacks out. Up until that point, I'm nervous. And I think being able to be more transparent about that, because we're not afraid of people judging us, that is what creates such a valuable interaction with another human being and allows them to be like, oh, That person may look like me or they're doing something similar to me and they deal with that too. I can do that. And that's essentially what your book is. And that's what this conversation is. And it's just, I think we're starting to see a shift now, but more and more people, I believe, would benefit if they saw people for who they truly were. But those people that have influence would have to accept who they are and be comfortable sharing that, because that helps them get out of where they may feel down or they may feel insecure or things like that. And so I love that you shared that, because I went through a similar thing. And like imposter syndrome, it's huge. And like even the most successful people on whatever level you want to categorize them, they deal with it too. If you talk to them, get deep down, we're all human. We all experience the same thing. So I love that
Yeah.
you brought up the mask, because that's just so true.
Yeah, dude, I love that. And yeah, when I remember that when you were speaking next to Dave Goggins, I was like, my boy, Josh, he made it. But one comment that I would say on that is like when you, in that moment when you said, like, I'm nervous, I find that all of a sudden, like, if you can bring the truth in a moment and you say you're just honest and you're like, I'm nervous, it almost like it feels so liberating, because it almost feels like when you tell your truth, you can kind of get this thing off your chest. And there's this great quote, I don't know who said it, but it's when you speak your truth, you give people the ultimate gift, which is they can also tell their truth. Right. And so it's almost like we're all like these minds in a room that are just like trying to exist, trying to conform to life, trying to survive, trying to thrive. And we all have like these various like imaginations, realities, traumas, nightmares going on in our heads. And it takes one person, if that's not yourself, to like establish truth in a room, in like a physical environment, for everyone else to be like, oh man, like, oh, he gets it, like I can be myself, and like that's probably been one of the best things for me on this journey of like, I like, ever since I sort of started to talk about my story, I've had like so many people who I've been like close with my entire life, who I've gotten like 100 times closer with, because they're like, "Oh, Mark, I had no idea that you were going through that, but I actually was too, and that's why I didn't talk to you, or this and that." And so that's been the biggest thing. It's like when you can be yourself, when you can speak the truth, you give people the gift of them also learning that it's okay. And like, the reality is that when you look at past experiences and you look at sort of historical context, for example, like, you know, being a woman, being somebody who doesn't look like, a person who can be a leader, whether it's your gender or your race, or just looking at like, past historical events of like, war and genocide and imperialism. I definitely think like all that stuff is still kind of like in our DNA, and I think it's causing like a lot of like, I don't know, like societal discomfort. And I think the more that we can just speak about our truth, the more that we can get to a realistic conversation of how does the individual, take personal responsibility to gain this new sense of awareness and to work on themselves and to heal and to deal with their own crap. But then how do we sort of like in society and like these external environments, how do we create spaces where that's just a little bit easier for them, right? And like a great example of this is, I think, like a classroom where like there have been so many moments where like I remember being a kid and facing social anxiety, and like whether it was racism or whatever it was, just not being accepted. And the reality is that does affect people across like billions of, the billions of populations of this world population. And so I feel like that's also going to be a part of the conversation, because I feel like the only way that you can actually fix a problem is by looking at the past and by looking at the truth, and realizing that's a problem. And then once you realize and accept that it's a problem, then taking the right steps. But I feel like if you don't really acknowledge it, then it's massive. I mean, a big thing for me was like, I remember I remember growing up and just being like, wow, literally nobody on TV looks like me. And so I think it's part of, it's like both of these conversations of like, what can we do in terms of ourselves, personal responsibility, our mind, But then what can we do from like a public perception of like those of us who do have influence? What can we do to help other people rise? What can we do to make things more open, to, create spaces where people don't feel like they're rejected or ridiculed or scorned? And so, it's definitely an interesting conversation, but that's definitely a part of it, I think, too.
Yeah, for sure. And it comes back to a belief that I've created recently, that our authenticity is our superpower. When you can step into your truth and you can speak your truth into existence and you can act on that truth, you liberate yourself, but you also liberate other people from their own insecurities. And a very important topic that I spoke about 2 years ago that I didn't think was going to have the response it did. I was just sharing my truth, was speaking about my brother, my younger brother, and how he passed away and the manner he passed away a little over 2 years ago now. And I had a bunch of people reach out to me and say, thank you for sharing that, because now I see that I have to share that with my experience with my family member. And they were so fearful of doing it for so many reasons. And none of it's right or wrong. It was what they're feeling. But my sharing my experience, my perspective on it, and what I've chosen to do with that information allowed that person to feel that freedom to do so as well. And it's helped other people now. And I hear from these people, later on, that because they shared, it helped another person. And that's what it comes back to. Like, your authenticity is your superpower, your truth, because there is no one more valuable person than another. We're all human beings. We all have the same value as a life form. And when you can share what you've gone through, what you've learned, your insecurities, your dark moments, your up moments, like all the things that make you who you are, like you said, it liberates other people because they don't feel alone. They don't feel weird or broken. They don't feel any of those things anymore because they connect with someone else. Especially if you can find someone that looks like you. Like you mentioned, you didn't see anyone that looked like you on television, things like that. Once you do, it puts that piece of information, that door of possibility opens in your mind, because you're like, oh shit. And that's modeling. Like that's why we all have people we look up to when we're younger. It's a model of success as it pertains to what's meaningful to us and what we want to be true about our lives. And I'm sure you have a lot of great mentors. I know you talk with a lot of great mentors in your life, and it's an amazing thing. And for people that are saying, well, how do you get a mentor? This and that. Like, I don't have a mentor. Like, it doesn't matter. We're in 2021. There's podcasts, there's YouTube, there's social media, there's books, there's whatever you want. And I call them virtual mentors. You and I were connected on the internet before we met in person. And you're someone I look up to. It's someone that's doing something similar to me that gives me inspiration to move forward when those hard moments show up in my life, because I'm human. Every human being is flawed. Every human being is going to have ups and downs. That's a part of being human. The difference of those that succeed and move forward is how they frame things. Yeah, it's okay to feel depressed. It's okay to feel sad, upset, angry, frustrated, guilty, shameful, jealous, all that stuff. But it's how, when you do snap out of that state, which I think you and I agree on this, like movement, it was one of the best ways to break a state. Getting outside, just moving. Yeah. Getting outside especially, or just moving in your house. Like, I have an Indo board over here that I love just getting on. It helps me stay focused. It deals with the ADHD I deal with, and it gets me moving. And when you can look at something like that and say, what can I learn from this? You can move forward, but it takes being curious. And I think that that's something that you've expressed, that I express, and again, comes back to being authentic. And I also want to be mindful of time, because we're at 50 minutes and that went by. I'm only, we're only on the first bullet of many that I had. So
flow state.
So yeah, exactly. Like, time goes by quick when you're flowing. So I want to be respectful of your time. So you just let me know. I personally have, I'd say, another 30 minutes, and we can always do another, because there's a lot of fascinating topics that I know you and I both resonate with and I want to get into. But for sake of time, I just want to highlight a couple, if that's okay with you, before we wrap up.
Yeah, I think I have it sucks. I have 5 minutes left. I have a client call at 4.
Okay, well then we'll just continue this later on, because
please, let's do
it. I really want to get your take on a lot of these things, and like I said, we resonate with a lot of them. But yeah, and let's just start there, because I was tweeting Logic lyrics today just because I was like, fuck, that's so good, and it's his. For right now, it's his finale, goodbye album. To now he's moving into fatherhood and all that, but. I know you have a passion for hip hop, and I want to talk about hip hop and the power of words, because I see a lot of the similarities in artists we listen to are,
Yeah.
they speak heavily into manifestation. And I listen, like Mac Miller is one of my favorite musicians of all time. And I listen to him, Big Sean, and Logic, and I listen
Big
to their
Sean.
progression, and it's they're speaking their truth into existence that has yet manifest, and then they get to a point where they're surpassed that, and they're talking about stuff when they're in high school. Mac was rapping when he was 16, 17, and blowing up. So with the couple minutes you have left, let's just speak about what hip hop
Yeah.
means to you, does for you, and the power of words, and how it's influenced you in your life.
Yeah. Dude, so I remember never being into hip hop until I heard Logic. And I remember, fun fact, like I had a YouTube channel. It was about video games when I was like a little kid. And I remember I used a Logic song. This was like in 2008 in one of my videos. And I remember he commented on my video and he said like, thanks for using my music. And I had like no idea who he was at the time. And so like, for me, um I think if for me, like, growing up, I felt very like suppressed and repressed in many ways. And for me, I think like, hearing like Eminem rap, Logic rap, and like break down these things, even if I didn't really understand them at the time, I feel like that was my first glimpse at like emotional expression. And it really wasn't until like my transformation where I really just started to discover the power of music. And I mean, I rap all the time. I write music all the time, and it's completely
Yeah, I want to
changed.
follow up on that later because I've been waiting to see. Maybe I missed it, but I've been waiting to see what you've been coming up with because I know you've been talking about that.
Yeah, yeah. But for me, it's the biggest thing that I've learned is like, and I worked with like a music coach, a voice coach. The biggest thing that I've learned is like music, lyrics aside, but it is in terms of like the bars and the beats and stuff. Music is mathematical, and the reason why I say that is because even if you've never heard a song before and you listen to it and it's offbeat, your ear knows that, it recognizes that. And that's because like there's a certain like mathematical um like way that your brain perceives music. And it's almost like the way that I think about it is like we have brain waves and we can also see sort of music waves. And I think for me, like music is honestly, healing. It really is. And Logic talks about this all the time. And I listen to Big Sean, I listen to Logic, I listen to sometimes Joyner Lucas, different people
Yeah,
who,
Joiner.
yeah, different people. Actually, I don't know if I told you this, but I met him at a grocery store
Yeah, I
once.
remember seeing that story. That's amazing.
That's crazy. But really looking to people who have conscious lyrics, because like one of the biggest like realizations for me is, I really do believe that the way that we're going to change the world is through music. And when you look at sort of what currently has like the culture, the mainstream, it's music, it's rap music, it's hip hop. And there are already artists out there who are starting to do this, from Justin Bieber to Logic to Big Sean, who are starting to express themselves consciously in a way that can be very mentally healing. And so I think music is going to be the biggest thing that like is really gonna like be like a mental health tool, believe it or not, for people, and for people to just like wake up and to realize. And so yeah, and so yeah, I mean, there's so much more I want to say, but I don't
Yeah,
want
no,
to like
I, I,
start a
I
tangent.
definitely understand. I want to respect that, and we'll hop off. And the last thing I want to say is, yeah, music, it hits us energetically on a cellular level, and so much science is around this that a friend of mine does all the music for Dr. Joe in his seminars and his
Oh,
meditations and all
nice.
that, and they design music to a certain state, and it's phenomenal. So we'll pick up our next episode on hip hop, the power of words, because the unconscious mind learns everything. Like learning is all done in the unconscious mind, and lyrics, like words and tone and music, all that is energy and it sticks there. And yeah, and on that note, actually, I want to encourage you to, if you haven't already, check out Mac's latest albums, Swimming in Circles, and how he designed it in a circle
Wait,
like
who?
album. Mac Miller.
Oh, Mac Miller. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Swimming in Circles. You'll probably be shocked by the different style if you're not already familiar with like his transition from like hardcore hip hop, like Eminem shows, to you'll see. He had a crazy transformation. But anyways, I want to respect your time. I hope you have a good client call. I appreciate you coming on the Great Matters podcast, and I am excited to do this again and to get this. I don't even know. We're gonna keep going. So I appreciate you, man. I appreciate everything you've done for me and other people, and I encourage everyone to check out your book, Screw Being Shy. And yeah, we'll talk again soon, man.
Dude, I appreciate you, man. We'll talk soon for sure.
All right, love you, bro. Have a good one.
Okay, man. All right. See you later. Take care.